Hello, Bedford. I'm Jerry Hanauer, and I'm your host today for this edition of Candidates Corner, which BCTV brings to you as its exercise in democracy in our town of Bedford. Our guest today is Sue Mullen, and Sue is a candidate for state representative in Bedford, District 7. Good to see you, Stu.
Thanks for having me in today, Jerry.
Yeah. So, Sue, I've been doing this for quite a number of years, these interviews, but I've never interviewed a candidate with deeper New Hampshire roots than you have. So tell us a little bit about your family, about your schooling, which is all New Hampshire. Tell us about that, your grandparents, your parents, the whole thing.
Happy to. I'm third generation New Hampshire. My parents were born in Manchester, as was I and my three siblings. My grandfather on my dad's side was born in Manchester. My mom's parents were immigrants from Ireland, and we've had some family immigrate from Canada as well. And I don't think anything makes you more native New Hampshire than being from the west side of Manchester, which is where I grew up. I graduated from West High School, long beloved by Bedford residents before Bedford High School was built. And I went to Keene State College and got a Bachelor of Science in Elementary Education once I left high school, and came back to Bedford, New Hampshire. Though I want to clearly state that as a 21-year-old, I said that there was no way that I would ever return anywhere near Manchester when I was in my professional life. So it strikes me as both funny and sort of ironic that I spent my entire professional life here in Bedford.
And that's a 39-year teaching career and counseling career here in the Bedford School District.
It is. I started as a classroom teacher in 1978 at the age of 21. And I taught for 12 years both at the McKelvey School and the Memorial School. And I would say probably 7 or 8 years in, recognized that I was ready to go to graduate school, which I did, and received a master's in counseling from Northeastern University. And that launched me on my 27 years in the counseling office, both at McKelvey and at Lurgio.
And you're a Hall of Famer. And I'm going to have to do a little bragging for you right now. Let me introduce the subject. Last year was the opening year of the Bedford School District Hall of Fame.
Yes.
And there were 6 people inducted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 3 of them were past superintendents. There was Ann Remus, there was Dennis Pope, there was Tim Mays. One of them was the athletic director, who really founded a great athletic program for the Bedford schools. That's Bill Whitmore.
Yep.
And one was a business community advocate of the schools, and that was Bill Greiner. And there was one teacher, and there'll always only be one teacher who was the first teacher to be inducted into the Bedford School District Hall of Fame, and that's Sue Mullen. So really, you're the first teacher to have been inducted.
It was an exceptionally meaningful thing for me. Anyone that has followed my career in Bedford realized that the decision to retire was huge. And there's a lot of activity that goes along with retiring, lots of recognition and parties. And when the letter came from the school district in June, I think it was close to the end of the school year, and indicated that I was going to be inducted into the Hall of Fame as the first staff member, it is the one time that I actually cried in my retirement process. It meant the world to me. And I'm happy to greet the next class of inductees whenever they happen to be announced.
Well, it was a wonderful choice. Now you want to represent the people of Bedford as its state representative. And let me introduce the background of state representative ballots here in Bedford. Bedford voters can vote for 7 state representatives.
Correct.
And they all represent Bedford. You have 7 votes. 6 of those represent only the town of Bedford itself. That's District 7.
Right.
And we also have 1 state representative seat, which we share with Amherst.
Correct.
That's District 41. But in going to the polls, I don't think the Bedford voters need to worry about that too much, but they should know that they can vote for 7 candidates. And you're a district from Bedford alone.
Absolutely.
That's District 40. I'm sorry, that's District 7.
Right.
So.
It's been an interesting experience because I probably don't have to tell you, Jerry, that I don't even know when the last time was in Bedford that we had to have a Democratic primary runoff as we were leading up to the general election.
Yeah.
This year we did, and the 6 candidates that were chosen to move on to the general election will be running against 6 Republican candidates and 1 Libertarian guy. And it's really democracy at its best because the winner are the top 6 vote getters. So, regardless of party,
Yeah.
the top 6 vote getters are
Top 6 for District 7,
Yep.
plus the top 1 for District 41.
Right, right.
Very good. Yeah. Okay. So, as a Hall of Famer, well, first of all, let me say that I remember asking you 2 years ago whether you'd run, and you hadn't quite retired yet.
Correct.
And you were intrigued by the idea, but you didn't think you could put the full effort
Right.
necessary behind it. And I said, well, Sue Mullen is really serious about that. I mean, we have people who just put their name on the Democratic side of the ballot, just trying to fill in. But you decided you weren't going to give it a go until you were absolutely could be committed to it.
Well,
And
yeah,
boy,
it's interesting because certainly you and I have known each other over the years because I knew you as the parent of 2 lovely girls that came through the school system.
Thank you.
But in that phone conversation when you said to me, we'd like to put your name on the ballot in 2016, my recollection of the conversation is that I said to you, Jerry, I can't run because I have a full-time job. And you mentioned to me at that point that you understood why I was cautious, but that it wasn't terribly likely that I was going to win. And I remember laughing and saying to you, hey, listen, I'm not going to run unless I can throw myself into a campaign without worrying about whether or not it's impinging upon my ability to do my job, or in the unlikely event that I would win, how could I serve? The school district wouldn't let me out every Wednesday from January to June.
And you weren't kidding, because you have set the standard, I think, set the bar for what an active, vibrant campaign for state representative should be. And, we haven't had a Democrat who's been a state representative in Bedford since 1935, I think.
Right.
So certainly all the
you know,
incumbents take for granted that, they haven't had to campaign. And I think you've whoa, what's going on here? You've unsettled them.
Listen, I have to say that I am so far from doing this alone that it bears witness to the impact that a team of people can have on an event or an outcome, because I have been fortunate enough to be surrounded by people that really wanted to help me with this campaign. So this 62-year-old, while I'm okay with email and Amazon, had to have loads of help on setting up a website, on establishing my Facebook presence, manning my social media. And I've been super fortunate that I've had people really from 2 different generations, people my age that I've known and befriended over the years, and an upcoming crop of young people in town that have been hugely inspirational to me and have really made me keep pace with them and want to win as a means of setting an example for what you can do when you put your mind to it.
Well, you've done it admirably, and I think you're being a little bit modest here. No one, aside from the talent that you've attracted, nobody outworks Sue Mullen. I'm convinced of that. It just astounds me the amount of effort that you cheerfully put into this candidacy.
Well, thank you for your support.
Well, let's talk about your campaign experiences in a minute, but let's go over some issues that I know are important to you.
Yes.
Too. And I know there were about 4 issues that are really important, and we'll cover them in turn. There's the opioid crisis, there's the mental health, and there's the graying of the workforce here in New Hampshire, and there's, of course, education.
Right.
So let's talk about these. Let's start with the opioid crisis.
Well,
as a counselor, you probably saw some effects of that
firsthand.
in schools.
Firsthand. I first became interested in the opioid epidemic, which really is a public health emergency at this point, as a practicing school district employee, because these knees were on the ground in prayer at the funerals of young people from our own community. I think that sometimes in Bedford we want to believe that we are insulated from a lot of the things that challenge our surrounding neighbors. But the reality is that this opioid crisis is everywhere in multiple generations. Last Friday I was at the Opioid Collaborative Forum that was hosted by Dartmouth Hitchcock in Concord. It was a tremendously educational experience for me because it covered the topic across the lifespan, from looking at the impact of opioids on babies that are born to addicted mothers, talking about adverse childhood experiences and how addiction may in fact play out in the schools as kids who are either born to addicted mothers or are witnessing trauma at home become school age and are in need of services. This forum looked at different sectors of state government and how they intertwine and enfold their services, talked about the impact on the homeless and the elderly. It was fascinating. The Surgeon General of the United States was the keynote. And Congresswoman Custer was there as a person who has done a tremendous amount for New Hampshire in bringing funding towards us. The governor spoke on this new hub and spoke model that we're in the process of developing in response to getting $46 million from the federal government. So it has been something that the interest was grown at home, but the knowledge that I feel I've been able to pick up just by being around people who know so much more than I do has been tremendous.
It's good to see a candidate who can bring experience to the issue as opposed to just kind of lip service about throwing more money at it. There's a lot of judicious decisions that need to be made.
Yeah, I think it's the coordination of services that's going to, really, the Department of Health and Human Services, of course, is actively involved in this. And when the governor spoke at this conference, he talked about making it a priority to not have people have to drive more than an hour to access help. And I think that that's going to be tremendously important because right now we have a Safe Stations program in Manchester and Nashua that attract a lot of people to Manchester and Nashua because those are the places in the southern tier of the state where you can actually walk in without fear of arrest and ask for help. But I think we need to do so much more with the Lakes region north, and hopefully we're getting to that.
I hope we get on top of it. Let's talk about a related issue, mental health.
Yeah.
I know you're an advocate for increased vigilance as far as the government is concerned on this topic.
Yep. Tuesday night, I was at the Manchester Library where the Department of Health and Human Services unveiled a draft plan for the 10-year mental health plan that the state is putting forward. And they're having listening sessions. So Commissioner Myers was there with some of his staff, and he spoke about how the state envisions the need for mental health services growing in the next 10 years. It was a heartbreaking situation. There were audience members that were related, they were family members of people with mental illness, and they spoke at length and with great passion and sometimes despair about having children that they could not find services for. One couple is raising a grandchild that had to go to Bennington, Vermont to receive services because there are no inpatient beds for adolescent girls. These were real people talking about utilizing their life savings to provide treatment in situations where there weren't services in New Hampshire. Sometimes people have had to go to Boston. One mother spoke at length about the fact that she just doesn't go to the emergency room in Manchester anymore. She heads right for Mass General. And despite good efforts by local hospitals, Dartmouth-Hitchcock certainly contracts with the state to staff the mental health facility, the New Hampshire State Hospital in Concord. Catholic Medical Center has also been doing some forefront sorts of things with establishing a unit. The Elliott has talked about increasing beds. But the fact of the matter is, the reality is that our mental health services have been cut and cut and cut to the point where we have Bedford residents who have had to leave their jobs and bankrupt themselves for treatment of kids, young adults, and something has to be done about it.
And of course, especially for young people, think of the burden on the educational system. When the state withholds money for mental health services, it ends up coming back, as so many of these issues end up doing, on local property taxes, because the schools are overburdened with responsibilities that are not taken care of at the state level.
Well, it's interesting because there was one particular mom who talked about the concept of dual diagnosis, which basically means not only do you have a mental health issue, but you might also have an opioid addiction. And she talked about her daughter perhaps using opioids as a way of numbing the pain of her mental health issues. And there's nothing that can be done in terms of this cycle of admitting people, having them released from their hospitalizations. It's really sobering, and it's a chicken and egg situation. What comes first? Does the mental health issue result in somebody becoming addicted to opioids? Or do you, even sometimes accidentally through sports injuries, through hip replacements, whatever, do you become addicted to opioids and then have subsequent mental health issues as a result of it? The reality is it doesn't really matter whether the chicken or the egg came first. We need to do something about both issues because they're affecting us tremendously.
And of course, not only does it have an effect on local property taxes and on the burdens that the schools have to carry and local agencies, but it also is a burden on the workforce. It's a burden on our businesses for sure. And so often you hear business leaders say how difficult it's becoming to find qualified good people who are reliable because this opioid epidemic is is taking a toll on the available workforce.
Particularly north of Concord. There are businesses that have actually closed because they're advertising for workers and they're unable to find people to fill the positions. The Lakes region has been particularly hard hit, and certainly north of the lakes there are even less opportunities for employment. So yeah, we have to do something about increasing the workforce, because without a workforce we can't be vibrant and we can't continue to grow.
Well, certainly education plays a role in that. So maybe talk a little bit about how better educated workforce or more available educational opportunities in New Hampshire would result in a better workforce for New Hampshire.
Well, it's interesting because as a school counselor, I saw parents for years fretting about where their children were going to go to college. And then, of course, we've had waves of college graduates who don't fulfill the workforce needs. We need skilled laborers. We need people who are adept in the fields of technology and science. And in order for that to happen, we have to have an affordable education in New Hampshire, both for our students K through 12 and for our students once they graduate from high school. And whether that comes through our attempts at helping kids access the community college to meet some of their general education requirements, or attracting new research and development to the University of New Hampshire so that it does not rank 50th in the country in support of public education. I want to say that again. The University of New Hampshire system ranks 50th in state support. And a recent statistic is indicating that even if we double the state support, we would still be in 50th position. So, of course, what's happening is our kids, they're leaving New Hampshire to go to school elsewhere because they can actually be educated in private or public universities in other parts of the country less expensively than here at home.
And then the University of New Hampshire and its university system tries to attract out-of-state students to make up for the deficit for unfunded higher education here. So we have a greater and greater proportion of out-of-state students, and they're not necessarily sticking around after they graduate. So,
I mean, in order for people to, young people to choose New Hampshire as their home, it certainly helps if they've grown up in New Hampshire and they have come to love New Hampshire as home. But it also helps if there are job opportunities and, the cost of living is affordable. But if you don't grow up with that love of New Hampshire and you're looking at a state that has minimal funding for secondary education and a lack of services on many different levels, then, it's going to take some convincing to get young people to stay in the state.
I'm sure we both understand the kind of admirable, frugal attitude which New Hampshire residents have towards their government. But so many times, particularly in the field of education, it seems to me that the state legislature is failing to distinguish between what is an expenditure and what is an investment in the state.
Right.
Let's talk about another issue. This is going to be a little bit impromptu. I don't think we talked about this, but I was looking at your Facebook page. I think you can handle it.
Okay, go for it.
I was looking at your Facebook page, and there was a link to the latest findings of the investigations of the Department of Environmental Services regarding the water crisis here in Bedford and in Merrimack, in South Bedford and Merrimack. So it really, I know other candidates are giving kind of lip service to this, but there it is right on your Facebook page, and they can update themselves of what's happening.
Let me tell you something. People forever have touted the schools as the reason that young families move into town, and I do not doubt that for a moment. As somebody who registered young families for decades coming into, moving into Bedford, I certainly understand that the schools are a big draw. But if you do not have clean water, if you have PFOAs that are above federal guidelines,
way above,
if you have people who have been on bottled water in sections of our community, some for multiple years now, the impact on being able to sell your home is going to be huge. The reluctance to move to Bedford, if it becomes known as a community that has bad water, is going to be huge. And so I think we need to be looking at this, because I'm not so certain that the experience that we have right now with people towards the Merrimack end of town, we don't know if that is going to be resolved in a timely fashion. The state has said yes, but there has not been any, there's no shovel in the ground bringing that public water yet. And we should be looking at the entire community
Sure.
and determining whether or not we have PFOAs in other locations,
Yeah.
places where we used to have a dump. And, that was mitigated and we built the transfer station. But we're not entirely sure that we won't have groundwater issues someplace else in town either.
Yeah. And it's a growing problem.
Yeah.
Let's talk something a little bit more the human side of your campaign. I know
Sure.
you've been on the campaign trail, and it's been an exemplary campaign for anyone who wants to know how to run
Thank
for
you.
state representative. Spin us a yarn or two about your experiences on the campaign trail.
Well, it's interesting, Jerry, because most recently I have changed my mantra to be either I will win or I will lose or I will die in the attempt. And as tongue-in-cheek as I can be about that, we have had a super active campaign. I have had, I'm going to say 18 to 20 meet and greets. I have 9 between today and November 1. Those are private citizens opening up their home, inviting their neighbors, regardless of their party, Republicans, undecided, undeclared, and Democrats, coming in for 2-hour listening and talk sessions to sort of get to know me a little bit if they don't know me, for me to get a better read on what some of the issues are that people are worried about. So we've done that. Social media, of course, has taken on a life of its own, so it's a new way of communicating. I mean, it's what we do. So there's been a ton of that.
A learning experience for you.
It certainly has, and door knocking,
Yeah.
knocking on doors, the old-fashioned way.
Right. Well, you've taught Bedford State Rep candidates how to do it, and I think you've kind of told us today how you would act as a state representative, and it's a very attractive scenario indeed. So let me thank you for coming on to
You're quite welcome. You're quite welcome. Jerry.
Candidates Corner here, and thanks so much for sharing your views. And Sue Mullen, candidate for state representative. And let me remind our viewers that they can vote on November 6th,
Yep.
Bedford High School, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m.
I will be there.
You'll be there. I know you'll be there.
6
And I
a.m.
hope
till
all
8 p.m.
viewers and everybody else in Bedford comes to the polls as well to vote. So that's November 6th. So thanks to our viewers for watching.
Thank you so much, Jerry, for having me. And I look forward to the results on November 6th.
It was a pleasure.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Sue.